This evening on Early Edition at 6, President Park Geun-hye calls for bipartisan support to pass pending bills to prop up the economy and reform the pension program for government workers in her second parliamentary address. And the prospects are dim for the highly anticipated inter-Korean talks that were scheduled to take place this week. North Korea says it will not participate in the talks until anti-Pyongyang leaflet campaigns by South Korean activists are stopped, while Seoul's Unification Ministry reiterates that the North has no legal grounds to say so. Small and medium-sized enterprises push aside Korea's conglomerates to take center stage as nearly half of the nation's SMEs become market leaders in the global stage today. These stories and more coming up at 6. It's Wednesday, October 29th here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6, live from Seoul. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Chan. Thank you for joining us. We begin with President Park Geun-hye's parliamentary address today.
She laid out the details of the government's budget for next year, which is nearly $20 billion more than this year.
That's right. The president appealed to lawmakers to quickly pass the budget bill and other bills related to boosting the economy. Our Choi You-sun starts us off.
Despite the risks of financial losses and ballooning debt, the president said if Korea doesn't invest more to address the challenges of low growth, low inflation, and a weak Japanese yen, the Korean economy could fall into a long-term slump. Manufacturing production in the third quarter shrank by nearly 1%, and exports also dropped significantly.
지금이야말로 우리 경제가 도약하느냐, 정체하느냐의 갈림길에서 경제를 다시 세울 수 있는 마지막 골든 타임입니다.
Referring to her three-year economic innovation plan, President Park talked about her vision of a creative economy which involves converging IT and different sectors to spur growth and stimulate the job market. And so the government will increase its support for entrepreneurs, startups, and small to mid-sized firms next year by 17% to a total of some $8 billion. The government has also significantly increased funds for safety and welfare to bolster both the hard and software of safety management and to provide the country's seniors and low-income households with more financial support. President Park also asked the parliament to cooperate in completing by the year's end reforms of the public pension system, which has suffered an expanding deficit.
그동안 국가를 위해 헌신해온 공무원들의 희생을 요구해야 한다는 점에서 솔직히 어느 정부도 이런 개혁이 두렵고 피하고 싶을 것입니다. 그러나 매년 막대한 국민 세금이 투입되어야 하는 상황을 그대로 방치할 수는 없습니다.
Before wrapping up her speech, President Park said the government managing finances alone will do no good unless the parliament moves to pass a backlog of bills designed to improve the people's livelihoods and to strengthen the nation's safety system. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
And right after her policy address at the National Assembly, President Park Geun-hye held a meeting with leaders and policymakers at the two main rival parties.
Our political correspondent Ji Myung-gil reports on their progress and the remaining points of contention.
At the meeting, President Park Geun-hye and party leaders shared the view that the rival parties put aside differences and speed up long-stalled legislation that has been blamed for a slow economic recovery and public sector reform.
원래 목표는 그 경제를 활성화시켜서 세수도 늘리고 이렇게 하겠다는 건데 그 고리는 끊어지는 거거든요. 예산만 써버리고 그렇게 되지 않도록 시급한 상황이 꼭 필요한 법안들만 이제 고르고 골라서 이렇게 부탁을 드리는 거니까 좀 시급히 처리를 좀 해주셨으면 하고.
Both parties agreed to pass next year's budget by the legal deadline of December 2nd, and the three bills seen as the most urgent by the end of this month. The three bills will help uncover the truth behind April's ferry sinking, enable public sector restructuring, and allow the government to go after illegally obtained assets. Speaking of the government's economic policies, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy's interim leader raised concerns over the government's stimulus measures.
Finance Minister Choi Geun-hye's stimulus drive dubbed Choinomics does not seem to lack specific policies to actually spur economic growth and restore consumer confidence. We believe the key to economic revitalization is improving livelihoods of the general public.
Moon said he believed the president will long be remembered in the country's political history if her government successfully removes inefficiencies in the public sector or reforms the pension program for civil servants by the end of the president's term in 2017. Wednesday's meeting with rival party leaders and policymakers comes as President Park seeks a breakthrough in the prolonged political deadlock between the two rival parties. Kim Young-gyun, Arirang News.
Tomorrow's high-level meeting proposed by South Korea has been scrapped, as North Korea says it will not show up unless the anti-Pyongyang leaflet launches by South Korean activists are banned. Seoul says it's still open to talks, but added it has no plans to reach out to the North for now. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
North Korea has turned down South Korea's proposal for a second round of high-level talks slated for this Thursday. In a message sent early Wednesday morning via the Inter-Korean military hotline, the North said it is up to Seoul to decide whether to proceed with the high-level talks or to cling on to the anti-Pyongyang leaflet campaigns by South Korean activists. South Korea's unification ministry reiterated it has no legal grounds to ban the activities of civic groups.
Although we maintain a consistent stance of resolving issues through inter-Korean dialogue, we cannot give in to unjustifiable demands.
The two Koreas agreed to meet for high-level talks sometime between late October and early November upon a visit to South Korea by a high-level North Korean delegation last month. Since then, tensions have escalated over the controversial leaflet launches, even leading to an exchange of fire across the border. While the meeting may not happen within the planned time frame, some experts say both parties will want to talk things out within this year.
High-level talks are essential for improving inter-Korean relations and must take place this year in order to smooth things out for 2015. It could take some time, but the possibility of a second round of high-level talks is high.
Still, it's a question of who will reach out first. South Korea says it is open to talks, but made clear that it does not have plans to make additional proposals to the North for now. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Staying on the North Korean issue, the United Nations has gotten one step closer to referring North Korean officials to The Hague for human rights abuses. A draft proposal on the violations taking place within the North has been made official, and the UN General Assembly could vote on it as soon as next month. Park Ji-won has the details.
The United Nations Third Committee, which deals with social, humanitarian, and cultural matters, has released a North Korean human rights draft proposal online. The 8-page draft urges the UN Security Council to take appropriate action to address the dire human rights situation in the North. It also says referrals to the International Criminal Court are in order, although it doesn't mention specific names. The draft expresses serious concerns about North Korea's systematic, extensive, and long-term crimes against humanity and denounces rampant human rights violations taking place inside political prison camps, which include forced abortions, torture, and starvation. The draft proposal was based on a 400-page report on North Korea's human rights situation published by an independent UN commission. The Third Committee is expected to pass the draft sometime next month, to be followed by a vote at the UN General Assembly. Adoption of the proposal by the General Assembly would not be legally binding, but South Korean officials say the vote would be a statement in and of itself. Marzuki Darusman, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in North Korea, said Tuesday that North Korea had invited him for a visit so he could investigate the human rights allegations firsthand. But that offer was made under one condition, that the UN remove the stipulation about referring North Korean officials to the ICC in a draft submitted to the third committee. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
We now shed light on a post-defection success story. North Korean defector Park Geun-hye has been named one of the BBC's 100 Women of the Year. The British broadcaster cited Park's efforts to raise global awareness of the suffering of North Korean citizens for the nomination. The 21-year-old defector came to South Korea 5 years ago and has since worked to shed light on North Korea's trafficking of women. Earlier this month, Park spoke at the One Young World Summit in Ireland, where she called on the Chinese government to stop sending defectors back to Pyongyang. A U.S. think tank reports North Korea could be exploring the possibility of launching ballistic missiles from submarines, judging by satellite images. Although that may open a new chapter in submarine warfare for Pyongyang, experts do reassure us it's too soon to worry. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
North Korea has built a new test stand to develop ballistic missiles that can be launched from submarines. This according to a new report published on U.S.-based website 38 North, which says commercial satellite imagery has identified the installation at the Sinpo South shipyard in the north. The report says the new stand is the right size and designed to be used for the research, development, and testing of ballistic missiles out of a launch tube, as well as evaluating the compatibility with submarines and surface combatants. Experts say, however, the communist regime will need a couple more years to be capable of topping its submarines with ballistic missiles. But if it succeeds, it will represent a new threat, as it could give the North the capacity to eventually replace the missile with a nuclear warhead. Last week, the U.S. Forces Korea commander and the South Korean defense chief both acknowledged that the North may have succeeded in miniaturizing a nuclear warhead. North Korea has roughly 80 submarines in its arsenal, including 20 1,800-ton subs, and has several battle-ready submarine bases on both the East and West Sea. That's 3 times more than what the South has. South Korea currently operates a total of 14 submarines, including 5 1,800-ton subs. The new development opens up a new chapter in submarine warfare and will force Seoul to boost its defenses to counter the threat, an action that is likely to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
An unmanned rocket exploded seconds after liftoff on Tuesday along the eastern coast of Virginia. That, as you can see, caused huge flames and loud booms, but fortunately, no injuries or deaths were reported. The 14-story Antares rocket, built by the private company Orbital Sciences Corporation, was to deliver some 2,300 kilograms worth of supplies and equipment to the International Space Station. In the press conference that followed, NASA emphasized that the property and vehicle damage was significant and said it's trying to figure out what went wrong. Moving on to the retrieval operation for the sunken Seoul-ho ferry, efforts to recover a body found yesterday inside the submerged ship are being hampered by poor conditions at sea. Kim Min-ji has the details.
Recovery operations are being delayed off Korea's southwestern coast for a body that has been found on the sunken Seoul-ho ferry. The government's disaster response headquarters said divers tried Wednesday morning to recover the body but failed due to poor underwater visibility and fast currents. Divers will resume their efforts to reach the body again later in the evening when the currents subside. The body, presumed to be that of a female student, was spotted near a restroom on the 4th deck of the ferry. It's the first body seen inside the wreckage in 102 days and comes more than 6 months after the ferry capsized and sank. Victims' families raised doubts about the efficiency of ongoing search efforts, saying the latest discovery was made in the exact location they had specifically asked divers to search. Divers said they had searched the area more than a dozen times previously, but believe currents have recently carried the body to where it is now. The discovery pushes the death toll in the tragedy to 295, with 9 still missing. This past weekend, victims' families voted to continue the underwater search operation inside the ferry and to hold off on raising the 6,800-ton vessel. The representatives for the victims' families on Tuesday called for increased search efforts and to prioritize the wishes of the families as promised by the president. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea posted another current account surplus in September. That's 31 months in a row now. The Bank of Korea says the surplus stood at $7.6 billion last month, up $420 million from a month earlier. The central bank attributed the rise to strong exports that went up 4.2% from the previous month to over $50 billion. The deficit of services account, which includes spending by Koreans on overseas trips, shrank to $280 million from the $730 million recorded in the summer vacation month of August. The unit price of Hyundai Motors exported autos hit a record high in the third quarter, thanks to luxury models like the Genesis. The Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association says the average price of Hyundai cars sold overseas went up nearly 5% in the July to September period from the previous year to almost $17,000. That comes despite a drop in the number of cars exported and the total amount of exports. Hyundai sold around 9,800 units of its Genesis model in the third quarter this year, a whopping 60% rise from a year ago. More positive numbers, LG Electronics' net profit went up nearly 87% in the third quarter from the previous year, thanks in no small parts to sales of its G3 smartphone. The company said Wednesday its net profit was roughly $194 million in the July to September period, a notable rise from the $103 million recorded in the same period last year. The figure, however, falls short of the market consensus of roughly $290 million pulled by Yonhap Infomax, which based its figures on estimates from 17 brokerage houses in Korea. LG's operating profit skyrocketed 112% from the previous year to $440 million, with sales reaching $14.3 billion, an increase of 7.4% from the previous year.
Supporting startups and fostering small and mid-sized companies as major exporters, that is at the heart of President Park Geun-hye's drive to turn Korea into what she calls a creative economy. But there are already signs that startups have a leg up on their much larger Korean counterparts in the global market. Song Ji-sun explains.
Scanning fingerprints is now a common way of keeping work hour records for employees. This Korean company called Suprema has won global recognition for developing and marketing the widest range of products in biometrics and access security industries. As the only company in the world capable of rolling out all products by using its own technologies and parts, it grabbed a 60% share in the fingerprint recognition module market in less than 15 years since its founding.
Many come up with business ideas, but the key to success for startups is commercializing those ideas. We've proved our technical prowess by repeatedly winning in the industry's most coveted competitions.
Suprema is one of some 63 Korean startups that enjoy #1 market share in the global stage, according to Korea's Small and Medium Business Administration. Although the Korean corporate sector is best known for the success of chaebols, or conglomerates, startups account for nearly half of Korea's 130 companies that have grabbed the largest market share in the world. Large companies represent only a quarter of them. The startup stocks range from manufacturers of juicers to vessel engine bearings.
Aggressive investment in research and development is the key to startups could keep their lead in the global market. These leading startups are also actively diversifying their export markets, shipping their products on average of 31 countries overseas.
Even if Korean startups manage to develop competitive technologies, many of them need support in other areas.
These startup businesses venture overseas markets solely with their technologies, but they lack efficient means to gain access to global clients. The government can help them win recognition by arranging exhibitions and other international events.
Industry experts also point out educational reform is needed to foster entrepreneurship and creativity badly needed to turn Korea into a trendsetter from a fast follower. 송지선, Arirang News.
Korea's business climate ranks as the world's 5th, the highest ranking the country has ever achieved. Citing the World Bank's Doing Business report on Wednesday, the finance ministry said the ranking also marks the 4th straight year Korea has been listed in the top 10. The report said the ranking comes thanks to improvements in sectors related to startups, granting construction approvals, and upholding the rights of minority shareholders. Singapore took the top spot, followed by New Zealand and Hong Kong. The World Bank has been analyzing the business environments of 189 countries every year since 2003.
More reasons for Seoulites to walk tall. Seoul remains a highly competitive global financial city. We rank 8th among 83 major cities on the latest Global Financial Centers Index. Korea's southern port city of Busan was 28th on the survey, conducted by a London-based consultancy think tank, Z-Yen Group. However, both cities actually went down a spot from the last report 6 months ago, according to the Korea Institute of Finance. New York and London placed first and second on the survey, followed by Hong Kong and Singapore. The index defines financial centers as global cities with a heavy concentration of internationally significant financial institutions, and the rankings are based on 6 categories, including business and living environment, market access, and human resources. Korea is charting a path to widespread use of digital documentation, meaning that those of you who still prefer the paper variety may soon have to do some adjusting. Our Shin Se-min reports from a conference happening on the sidelines of the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference in Busan, where digital documentation experts gathered this Wednesday to talk about the possibilities for a paperless future.
Everything is going digital these days. From paying taxes to filing out resident registration documents, the use of electronic documentation has made tasks like these much more convenient. Korea is already a leader in the government digital documentation field. But some sectors are still reliant on paper, and experts say it may be a while before the use of electronic documentation is as widespread.
It is a cultural task, and it won't be easy trying to bring everyone on board. But considering the era that we live in, digitalizing documents is something that needs to be done, and soon. There will be no more paperwork if it all goes digital.
But there's still a number of obstacles. Only 43% of institutions and businesses in Korea use electronic documentations, lower than the government's aim of 50% by 2015. And experts attribute the gap to a lack of understanding and awareness among everyday users. A group of experts gathered on the sidelines of the quadrennial ITU conference on Wednesday to discuss the possible directions for Korea in fully implementing these services on the domestic front and making inroads to the global market.
Fostering growth among private enterprises is the key to helping the sector expand. If the government puts more effort into sponsoring these services in the finance and medical sectors, where electronic documents are widely used, there will be no concerns about reaching the everyday user.
The National IT Industry Promotion Agency has already gotten a head start, and officials there say digital documentation services will soon be a reality in the IT sector. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, Busan.
And now let's take a look at the weather. It was very chilly this morning, wasn't it?
That's right, Jay. I think it's time for us to reach deep into our closet and pull out the warm clothes.
Exactly.
Let's turn to our Michelle for the latest on the weather. Michelle?
Good evening, guys. We had a nice sunny day here in the nation, but as we are transitioning into winter, the air is very cold and we have temperatures going below the teens in the mornings and nights. And tomorrow is looking very similar to today with mostly clear skies, and another warm afternoon is expected with temperatures ranging from the high teens to the low 20s, although we'll still have the chilly mornings and evenings. And starting tomorrow evening, an autumn rain will fall all across the nation, bringing down the highs below the 20s. And looking further at the forecast, the temperatures will stay low or even lower after the rain clears out. And to our readings for tomorrow, so we'll start off the Thursday morning at 8 degrees before reaching up to 21 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out at 20 and 21 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops at 21 as well, while Dokdo drops down to 17, while Mount Gyeongang hits 19 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Michelle. And that does it for now. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for watching. Good night or good day, depending on where you're tuning in from. We'll be back with more tomorrow.